Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for this Yale Up Close Science and Engineering webinar. We're delighted to spend an hour with you to help you better understand all there is to know about the exciting world of STEM here on campus. We're going to wait for everyone to file into the Zoom room. So we'll get started in just a few moments. Thanks for your patience. All right, team, I think we'll get started. What do you think? All right, sounds good. I'm going to say good evening because it is 7 p.m. Eastern time here in New Haven, Connecticut. But if you are tuning in from across the country or around the world, really, it could be good morning, good evening, good afternoon, good middle of the night. We're so grateful to spend an hour with you for this Yale Up Close Science and Engineering webinar. My name is John Yee. I'm an Associate Director of Undergraduate Admissions here, and I'll be kind of playing MC for the evening. But I am so grateful to be joined by this all-star cast of both students and faculty members here at Yale. And so I think we'll start with a series of introductions. And I'll kind of go around the Zoom room and just facilitate this. But Lauren, do you want to start by introducing yourself?
Hi everyone, my name's Lauren. I'm currently a junior here at Yale and I study electrical engineering. I'm originally from Virginia, but have loved moving up to the Northeast and getting involved with everything that New Haven has to offer.
Wonderful. Thanks so much. Corinne, how about you?
Yeah, thanks so much, John. Hi, everyone. My name is Corinne, and I'm also a third-year student in Saybrook College here on campus, majoring in ecology and evolutionary biology, and I'm originally from Ann Arbor, Michigan.
Wonderful. Thanks. Professor Demers.
Hello, I'm Sarah Demers. I'm a particle physicist and professor in the physics department. Also have served as director of undergraduate studies in physics. So excited about research and the curriculum and all kinds of things. Happy to be here tonight.
Wonderful. And finally, Professor Fitzgerald.
Hi, everyone. I'm Tesca Fitzgerald. I'm a professor in the Department of Computer Science, and I work on robotics and AI. So the classes I teach are the artificial intelligence course and robotics course, and I run a research lab that focuses on getting robots to learn from people. I'm originally from Portland, Oregon, and I've lived all over the country in Atlanta, Boston, Pittsburgh, and now here.
Wonderful. I'm so excited that we have this panel here that I think will really be helpful for all of you viewers to better understand what makes kind of science and engineering, whether it be research, the classroom experience, kind of extracurricular engagements, unique. Again, not better or worse than any other school, but unique. I enjoy kind of moderating these webinars, and in my role, I help oversee the evaluation process for students that are STEM intending. And something that I've really enjoyed so much about working in admissions is as a non-scientist, as a student that studied economics and music as an undergraduate here, I wish I could go back and study STEM, just because the more I learn about STEM in this role, the more overwhelmingly exciting I feel about what it means to be part of the science and engineering community here. Just to give you an overview of how we'll spend the next hour, we'll start with some faculty presentations. As much as I love our students, and I'm so grateful that Corinne and Lauren here are here, I'm so honored and humbled to call people like Professor Demers and Professor Fitzgerald community members and colleagues of mine. So our faculty panelists are going to give a little bit of an overview about their research interests, some of the classes they teach, and give you a sense of what it might be like to be a student here on campus. Then we'll transition to some pre-submitted question and answers. Over 100 of you submitted questions, so we'll try to get to a good number of the juicy ones this evening. And then finally, what we'll do is for the last 15 or 20 minutes or so, we'll open up the question and answer to live questions. So for those of you that are engaging the question and answer function at the moment, if you could hold off on using that until we reach that kind of point, I'll let you know when we're taking questions. That would be great. But to get started, I could kind of monologue just about how incredible it is to be a scientist or engineer here, but I kind of wanted to hand it over to Professor Demers, who's going to get us started. So whenever you're ready.
All right, wonderful. Thank you. So I am going to share my screen and it's going to be weird until it works. So just give me a second to get it online, as you can see. All right, we're very close. Thank you for your patience. Okay, So I'm going to spend my 10 minutes talking to you both a little bit about the research that I do and a bit about some of the teaching I've done at Yale. But let me start with particle physics. My field is trying to understand the fundamental constituents of the universe. What are the particles that make up everything around us, everything that we are? And also, how do those particles interact through different forces? We rely very heavily on Einstein's equation here, and this will be my only equation tonight, but I couldn't help myself. What we do in our high energy collisions is we get particles moving very, very fast, we collide them together, and that essentially hands the universe a certain amount of energy that we then can ask, all right, what is the universe going to do with that energy? And any particle that can be created will be created. We take a look at those particles that are created and use them to try to understand, what was the universe like in the moments right after the Big Bang? What can we expect as we move forward? And we learn more about everything around us. My field is a field that I guess you'd say we push that idea of there's no such thing as bad press. There's been a tremendous amount of excitement around the Large Hadron Collider at CERN. These are some of my favorite articles that came out. I guess this one here is particularly striking. Scientists at Large Hadron Collider hope to make contact with parallel universe in days. There's something that's really dramatic about that "in days" phrase. I can assure you that we actually are very, very safe, as excited as we are about our high energy collisions, and we do have the highest human created energy collisions in the world that we study at the Large Hadron Collider. We actually are very, very far away from the energy of the collisions that come in that we're being bombarded with by cosmic rays. So perfectly safe, but absolutely thrilling. This is a cartoon. It's showing you an example of a proton-proton collision at the Large Hadron Collider. So we have beams of particles being fired at each other after we've accelerated them very close to the speed of light. We have a detector that is 6 stories high. It's the length of a football field. It weighs as much as the Eiffel Tower, and we use it essentially like a very big camera that takes pictures of the collisions that come out, and then we get to study the constituents, all the particles that come out, try to trace their paths and understand exactly what happened inside those collisions. Recently, my group and I have been trying to understand the Higgs boson, a fairly recently discovered particle, trying to understand how it works. Really central to my work is including undergraduates in the research itself. And you see here some very sleepy looking undergraduates. This is going back. I came to Yale in 2009. I'll show you some more recent pictures soon. But I like this one because it was at the Higgs boson discovery announcement. And the reason these people are looking so sleepy is that they stayed up overnight so that they could be in the front row seating in the auditorium at CERN when the Higgs boson was announced. And there even were, this was 9 o'clock in the morning, Jerry was on Skype with some of his friends in Chicago at the time so that they could be basically beamed in to the announcement. It was 3 a.m. So there were Yale undergraduates at 3 a.m. who were up in Chicago, or maybe it was 2 a.m. in Chicago, listening to this announcement. But the undergraduates who work in my group recently have been working on creating the event displays, and that's what this piece of basically software is, the results of this software, so that we can get a visual scan of what happens inside our collisions. And this is the group both doing some of that very hard work at CERN. This is a picture from 2022, and also enjoying the landscape around CERN. Something that I had to understand as an American going to the Large Hadron Collider, which is in Switzerland and France, it's on the border between the two, is the importance not only of all of that time we spend in front of our laptops, but that downtime that we spend together, maybe having a coffee, going out to dinner, talking, and yes, I admit, mostly talking about physics, but having a lot of fun together. It's amazing how many ideas will bubble up when we give ourselves some time to relax and have conversations together. In addition to my work at CERN, I'm also on the mu to E experiment at Fermilab. At the Large Hadron Collider at CERN, we're going for the highest energy collisions. As I mentioned, we're trying to hand nature that energy and learning everything we can from those collisions that come out. Mu-to-E has a very different perspective, a very different approach. At Mu-to-E, which is an experiment that takes place outside of Chicago. Again, I have both graduate students and undergraduates who are working on this, based at Yale during the school year and heading out over the summers to be at the lab. This experiment is only about 30 feet long. It's much smaller in scale. And what it's looking for is a very rare predicted decay of one of the fundamental particles into results that would show us physics beyond the physics that we understand now. So rather than going for the moonshot of the absolutely highest energy collisions we can imagine looking at, we're approaching it from a different angle of trying to see something really subtle in our data, something that's very subtle and rare. And I just wanted to show you a picture of many of the other students, undergraduates who I've worked with on this research. And maybe people will have some questions if you have questions about particle physics. I know it's hard in 10 minutes to give you much of an idea of it, the scale of it, and also the scope of it, but I'm happy to try to answer any of those. But in addition to working really closely with people in my research at Yale, something that I've really loved is the interdisciplinary nature of the place. Not only interdisciplinary within the sciences, which is very fun, super interesting, but also thinking about the ways that the sciences interact with the arts, like a physics of dance class that I had an opportunity to teach with a dancer who was in New York City Ballet for a number of years, then danced with Baryshnikov and in a more modern dance perspective, and then came to Yale actually in her 30s after a dance career, became an undergraduate, and stayed at Yale and is now director of our curriculum in dance studies. But also the physics of music. There's a tremendous amount of science in the creation of music, but also a really fascinating influence from music into the history and development of physics from early days when people were doing scientific discoveries to the more recent times where we have theories like string theory that physicists think of as the particles of the universe being made out of resonances of strings, in the same way that a guitar, if you pluck a string, can make different notes. So some of the fun of this outreach between the sciences at Yale and the arts is thinking about a two-way street. Not only how can we use science to try to understand these arts better, but what can we learn from the arts also in terms of the ways that we're doing science. Additionally, Yale is a place where there's a tremendous amount of work that's done in the public policy realm, both at the Jackson School, but also, just within the different disciplines in the Faculty of Arts and Sciences. And that's been really nice for us to be able to partner maybe with writers or policymakers and think about not only the ways that science is governed by public policy, how is science regulated, but also the ways that science is influencing public policy. And then finally, a course called Being Human in STEM that looks at what it means for us as humans doing STEM, and how do we make this a more inclusive environment for us all to do good work. I have to put in a little plug for physics. I know that people who are connected are interested in a whole range of different kinds of science, but this just gives you an idea of the richness of the curriculum. You can see here the different areas of research within the physics department. So any department that you might be interested at Yale, you'll see that there are different ways that we organize ourselves intellectually in terms of the kinds of work that we're pursuing. But also we have all of these different majors that interact with physics. Maybe you want the standard physics major. Maybe you love mathematics, you love physics, and you just have to have both of them in your curriculum. You can major in math and physics, or physics and philosophy, something that's further afield. So lots of opportunities for you to think about joining your passion for STEM with other interests that you might have. And I'm coming up on my 10 minutes. I feel like it's over before it started. But thanks very much for your attention and for tuning in tonight. And I look forward to answering any questions people have later.
Thank you so much, Professor Demers. I always love hearing from you because as a musician that also considered myself a very serious student, the creation of a class like physics of dance was just mind-blowing, and I love that we can kind of point to that as this way that Yale has truly been interdisciplinary, which I love. Yes, thank you. And next up, we're actually all going to go back off camera because Professor Fitzgerald is going to share her research. Professor Fitzgerald, take it away.
Here we go. Can you see that? Can you hear me?
Looks great.
Here we go. All right. Fantastic. Hi, everyone. Again, I'm Tesca Fitzgerald. I am in the computer science department here at Yale, and I've been here a little bit over 2 years. What I do is I work on robotics, and I run a research lab that 2 years ago looked like this. I always like to show this picture because it's easy to see, you know, labs that are in motion and doing cool things, but all that has to start someplace. So 2 years ago, this is what the basement, formerly classroom in the computer science building on Yale campus looked like. Thankfully, it doesn't look like that anymore. It looks like this. It's now filled with people and robots and cool experiments. So I run the Inquisitive Robotics Lab, which consists of everything from PhD students, master's students to undergrads. And the kind of work that we do is we look at how people can teach robots. Those kinds of robots are typically robot arms. I was really excited when I took this picture. This is the arrival of the very first robot that I ever had getting to the lab. We've since set it up in a setting like this, where in this picture, we're studying how people correct the robot when it's about to make a mistake. The idea being that we're trying to study how it is that people perceive a robot as it's doing things. How do they perceive a robot that's doing well at a task versus one that's failing at the task? And how do they step in to try to help it out? With the idea being that if we can better understand that, then we can make robots learn better from people. So this is the main robot that I work with, are robot arms. In the past, I've worked with other robot arms. This is my lab assistant, Florence. This was my home office during the pandemic. I've also worked with more humanoid robots, such as these, throughout my PhD. And so the kinds of things that interest me are, you know, thinking about what it is that robots can really do for people. And when we think about the future, we also have to think about what it is that robots are currently good at now, and why aren't they doing what we want them to do? Why don't I have a personal assistant robot that can clean up at home while I'm busy all day, or robots that can, you know, help us out at work? And the reason is because robots are typically used in routine and isolated environments. So this is kind of what a robot comfort zone looks like. We have robots doing the same thing day in and day out in car assembly lines or in these palletization processes where they're just picking up pallets, stacking them up over and over again. So the robots are really good at doing this because nothing about their task or their environment is changing. They're totally prepared and pre-programmed with everything that they need to do. You'll also notice there's no people in any of these pictures. And that's very much intentional. These robots are behind cages because it's actually very unsafe to be around these robots. The robots are not aware of where people are, and you can get hurt. There's even been stories of people getting killed because they entered into a workspace. The robot isn't aware that they're there. It moved and injured or crushed the person. So this is where robots do really well, but it's highly limited if we want them to it's highly limited to cases where they're, you know, completely alone and doing routine tasks. And when I think about what it is that we want robots to do in the future, I think of things like this, where we have robots working side by side with people. And that requires them to be more adaptive to the kinds of things that people deal with. And so in a more dynamic manufacturing setting, for example, that might mean robots seeing new objects all the time. You know, that if it's working on a product that one day has a different branding or different trim or just looks different, we want robots to be able to quickly adapt. And that's something that you and I can do. We can look at a new object and see like, oh, that's painted a little bit differently than, you know, the object I have at home, or that's a baseball cap, even if it has different colors and a different logo on it. But those are things that are actually a little bit challenging for robots. Other things that are challenging for robots to adapt to are tools. So robots plan their motion based on where their gripper is. But when they're holding a tool, they don't really know what is the part of the tool that they need to be moving with respect to. So when they're using a screwdriver, really needs to think about the end of the screwdriver, or if it's picking up like a spatula kind of thing that it's using to pry something off of a surface, it has to reason a lot about the different parts of that tool and where the contacts need to be between that and the surface. And so that's really difficult for robots to learn. Anytime that you change out one of those tools, a robot has to relearn all of that. And so that's going to be very time intensive for a robot to have to be retrained for how to use that new tool. And then finally, we have, the fact that these are robots that we want to have them working with people. They need to be able to accommodate changes that'll happen if somebody goes out for lunch early, or a teammate is sick, or if somebody just has a preference, they don't like how close the robot is standing next to them. These are all things we need robots to be able to adapt to. So hopefully this gives you an idea of what the gap is between what robots are capable of and where it is that we want them to be, and like what are the challenges that are involved in getting robots to be more, fluidly able to work with people. Now, to give some different examples of what a robot comfort zone looks like in another setting, we want robots to help out around the home. I am always a fan of the Roomba because this is a robot that works really well. It does its job very well in all sorts of different people's homes, and it doesn't really have to learn much to work in a new person's home. But I'd say that's not really because it's good at adapting. It's more that robots are really good at ignoring these changes as they occur, or rather the Roomba is. In all these examples, the Roomba doesn't know that there's a cat sitting on top of it. It's just going around and doing its thing and trying its best to ignore any changes that are happening. So this works if you're a robot vacuum, but for other things in a person's home, it's not good enough to just ignore differences. A robot will have to be able to adapt to changes in lighting. It can't ignore the fact that it's getting dark outside and it might have to turn on a light bulb. It might have to notice when there's objects that look different, whether it's in a glass jar, plastic jar, ceramic, metal. These are all things a robot has to reason about. What is this object? Why does it look different? And maybe it has something to do with something that the robot is familiar with. And then finally, there's all kinds of variations of tools that a robot would have to learn how to use. And we don't want to have to train robots for every possible pot and pan and spatula and whatever that it could use. But ideally, we want them to adapt to different objects as they come up. So the kinds of approaches that I think about are related to machine learning, but they're a little bit different. And that a typical machine learning approach is essentially to give the robot lots and lots of data. And that would be data from all kinds of different variations of pots and pans and tasks and tools that it might run into. And that works in machine learning tasks where we have lots of data, but we don't really have that for robots. We don't have big repositories of data. And there are infinite ways that a task can vary for a robot. So the kind of perspective that I have is that rather than try to prepare robots with all the data that they could want, I think it's inevitable that robots will never have enough data. And so in that case, we want robots to be able to ask for help when they run into some kind of a task or setting that they don't know how to deal with. And so that's what really is at the center of all of my research, is getting robots to learn better from people. And that kind of learning takes place through physical interaction. And that might look something like this. So here we have someone who actually has never interacted with this robot until now. And here he's teaching a robot how to stack a set of cups. He's using his voice to tell the robot when to open and close its gripper. And as he's giving this demonstration, the robot's recording where its gripper is and where all the different objects are. And it's learning something about which object goes first and then next and so on. So this is great. This is the kind of thing that robots can learn from, but it's not enough to get robots to be generalizable. So for example, what happens if we change the set of cups? The robot might know how to stack this particular set of cups that was just demonstrated to it, but if we give it a different set of cups, it's clueless all over again. And so to give you an idea of what that looks like, if we have a task where the robot has learned how to do something with the foam blocks on the left, and then we replace that with Lego blocks. What the robot needs to figure out is, how do the old objects that it's familiar with map to these new ones? And it turns out that depends on the task that's being performed. So if you're stacking them, what we care about is the size of the block. But if you're sorting them by their hue, you might care more about that as the relevant feature. And so it turns out this is actually a hugely complex problem. It doesn't look very complex, but if you remember your factorials, for an end-to-end object mapping problem, there are n factorial possible combinations of pairings that the robot has to think about. So that gets to be a really big problem. So for 7 objects, there's over 5,000 ways that a robot can figure out a mapping from an old object to a new one. And then the robot has to think about all the different ways that it could do that mapping. So like, is it caring about the color of the object, the size, the location, the shape of it, and so on. So this is really difficult for a robot to figure out on its own. And that's where we again go back to the interaction. So we say, all right, well, let's say that the robot has already learned how to stack a set of cups from this demonstration. And now we give it a new set of cups, which is at the bottom. They might look similar, but you can see the yellow cup is a different size, the blue one's a different size. So little changes like that, that's enough to completely throw the robot off. So now what we have the person do is give assistance. You can't hear it since I have this muted, but the robot is asking, where do I put this? Or what do I pick up next? And the person is just pointing at what it is the robot should place that object, or handing it the next one that it should place. And what it's learning from each of these interactions is something about the correspondence between the old cup that it had used before and the new cup. And it's using that to reason about how it should use cups in the future. So here we have the person giving the robot help with every step of the task, but it turns out it actually doesn't need all of that. It was able to do it with only a couple of assists. All right, I'm out of time, sorry. I just want to show off a couple more robot videos. We did other object replacements, in this case with tools. We're getting the robot to learn a sweeping task and then change the brush that it's using. And again, that's really tricky because the robot doesn't know anything about brushes. It doesn't know the size of the brush that it's holding, or that the bristles have to contact the surface. So we have to teach it that. And so what we do is we have a robot take what it's learned with one brush, and then we give it corrections with a replacement tool. We use a really funny tool example, or tool replacement, which is the side of a mug, just because we can. And the robot actually learns something about the difference between the mug and the brush in the context of this task. And it's able to use that to then complete the task at a later time with that new tool. We did that with all kinds of different tool task combinations, from typical ones like a hammer for hammering to less typical ones like a hammer for sweeping, and so on. All right, with that, because I'm definitely out of time, I'm going to skip ahead to this picture. I don't have this labeled because I didn't get that far, but actually there's a couple of undergrads in this picture who have since graduated, and I'm very proud of them. And there's a couple of new undergrads in my lab too. So we definitely have undergraduates who are involved in research. And this can range from, you know, a one-off project for one semester to, you know, a senior thesis, or one of these students who I'm working with now, he's been working on a year-long project with me, running a user study with our robot to see how people can get a robot arm to play the game Wordle, which has been super cool. So there's lots of research opportunities. The best way to get involved in those is to, you know, take classes with the professor who you're interested in working with, and use that as an opportunity to really learn about the things that you would be doing in their lab, and make connections that way. And we have several other robotics faculty here who have been fantastic people to know. Look up their websites and their cool robot videos if you want to know more. And with that, I am happy to chat more and take questions.
My mouth was open to have that presentation. That is so fascinating. I'm going to invite everyone back onto the Zoom webinar on camera. We're excited to dig into some exciting questions. And if you found Professor Demers or Professor Fitzgerald's research really interesting, the cool part about Yale is that we have a lot of amazing faculty members. And in case you couldn't tell from the way they spoke about undergraduates involved in their work, or the fact that they volunteered their Sunday evenings to be on this webinar, our faculty are really excited about engaging with undergraduate students, right? Two quick things that I just wanted to address very briefly before we dig into some of these pre-submitted questions. There were a lot of questions in the chat and pre-submitted about whether, as a STEM major, you would have the opportunity to take classes in other departments or engage in extracurricular activities that didn't necessarily affiliate with STEM. And I think that really is one of the distinguishing factors about Yale, in that if you major in engineering, if you major in any STEM field, you're not in a separate undergraduate institution. All of our students are housed in one single college, Yale College, which is the 4-year undergraduate liberal arts institution on our campus, right? So if you choose to major in computer science or major in physics, it's kind of similar to majoring in English or majoring in history. And I love the fact that students are not kind of siloed off into a separate part of campus or a separate kind of division of undergraduate life based off of what their academic interests are, right? So in a robotics class, there might be a lot of engineers and computer scientists, but you may also have students majoring in philosophy, majoring in music. And it's this kind of interdisciplinary ethos that I think really connects well with why our faculty are so excited to work with our students, right? The last piece that I wanted to address is that there were a lot of questions about the admissions process in particular. And this webinar is not really going to focus on those bits, but there are plenty of resources online that I want to point you to. So I'll drop the links in the chat. One is to our podcast inside the Yale admissions office. I think our office has done a pretty good job at making very transparent all of the inner workings of how we consider applicants for admission. And then finally, for those of you that are involved in research as high school students, we have some guidance about submitting supplementary materials, specifically science research supplements on our website. So I will direct you to those links. But for now, I spent a good chunk of time this afternoon combing through all of the fantastic questions you submitted. So let's get started with a few. I have a feeling like this is going to be a tough one to limit to just one, Lauren and Corinne, but this is a question from Sienna, who's tuning in from San Mateo, California. Hello, Sienna. Sienna asks, if you had to choose one, what is the one unique experience in STEM that has meaningfully shaped your Yale experience so far? And feel free to jump in. Lauren, yeah.
Yeah, I can go first. I think the most meaningful STEM experience I have actually speaks directly to the question you answered earlier about taking classes in other departments. I had the opportunity to take a class my freshman year, which was all about formally proving aspects of the law. So it was a computer science professor and a law professor who decided to teach this class together. And they would alternate lectures, and I learned a lot about formal logical proofs and like deep legal theory, two things you don't really think of as combined. And I ended up doing research with both professors, but I think one of the reasons that was such a meaningful experience is because it really set up my next 2 years here at Yale thus far as being about the interdisciplinary aspects of STEM. And so I really enjoyed getting to like start off my Yale career with a class that introduced me to that.
That's awesome.
Yeah, that's an excellent question. Thanks so much for asking. Mine was also a class I took my freshman year. It was a first-year seminar, which is a class that is only open to first-year students. And it was called Collections at the Peabody Museum. And it was a course that was designed to take you from the beginning of the research process all the way to the end. So I was in a cohort of students, and each of us got paired with a faculty member to work on a project directly with the Peabody Museum collections. And so I was paired with a postdoc in Pincelli Hull's lab in the Department of Earth and Planetary Science. And I spent all year starting in that first semester learning about this deep sea fish called cyclothony and microfossil fish teeth. And I got to image all of the teeth using this really high resolution digital camera. And that sort of spiraled from that first day of freshman year into this huge research project. And now 2 years down the line, we're submitting a manuscript. I'm presenting at a conference in January. And it's just sort of a transformative experience from the first day where I got to learn about the research process with my peers.
I love that response. I mean, I think a lot of students might assume that like your most formative experience happens your junior, maybe your senior year, but the fact that that was something that happened in your early kind of weeks and months on campus is pretty exciting. One thing that you'll notice about Yale is that you're all interested in Yale College as undergraduate students or potential undergraduate students, but we exist in the ecosystem of a much larger research university, right? Yale University, which is also proudly home to 14 different graduate and professional schools. So this question is kind of related to that balance, and I think it's a good point to address. The next question is from Yu Jin, who tunes in from Dallas, Texas. Hi, Yu Jin. And this is going to be geared towards Professor Demers and Professor Fitzgerald. Yu Jin asks, how do Yale faculty view undergraduates, as opposed to graduate students, as members of their research and lab communities?
So I'm happy.
Go
Do you
ahead.
want to go ahead, Tesca?
You go first.
Okay. All right. So I think that probably is very group specific. So one thing that's true about particle physics is we use relativistic quantum field theory in terms of doing our calculations. And so many undergraduate students haven't had relativistic quantum field theory. Why would they? And so it means that they're in a different position than graduate students are in terms of what their foundational knowledge is. That being said, a lot of what we do when we try to detect particles in particle physics is accessible with first year physics that you would have as an incoming student. And so I would say there's definitely a difference for an undergraduate, that they're not going to have exactly the same kind of background. They more than make up for that, in my experience, with intensity, energy, excitement. And so I always try to have some graduate students and undergraduates in my group. The picture that I showed of the students sitting in the front row of the CERN auditorium because they stayed up all night and were first in line, those Yale students at the Higgs boson announcement, my graduate students did not stay up all night. They were in the third overflow auditorium. Now, I love my graduate students. It's not that they weren't dedicated, but the undergraduates were like, give me my pillow. I'm sitting in this line and I am going to be there for this announcement. So I think I like to have a balance of students, undergraduates, graduate students, postdocs, people coming at different levels of their careers. Academia is fairly flat. You'll work with people across many, many different parts of their careers.
So my thought on research for undergrads first requires me to define research in the first place, which I actually realize not a lot of people really know what research is. It's this word that everybody throws around, like, you got to get involved in research. It's like, what is that? Is it Google research or what? What research is it's about pushing the boundary of a field, pushing the boundary of what we know within a field, answering a question or even asking a question that nobody has asked or answered before, which is a huge, huge daunting problem. It's really exciting. It's fantastic to be able to study something that nobody has studied before, but it's also extremely frustrating. And so when students say they want to get involved in research, that's fantastic. I'm all for that. But I think they don't really realize that what they're saying is that they want to work on a hugely frustrating problem for a really long time until they figure it out years later. And I don't think that's really what you want to get involved in either. So that's what I think of as the difference between research for a PhD student versus an undergrad, is that for the PhD students, they are entering a multi-year commitment to start up their own research problem, address it over years and years, and like really self-direct the research. For an undergrad, that's not what we expect you to do. You have classes that you're working on. And so it's more like you want to get involved in research, but it might be at an assistant level where you're assisting a graduate student who's taking on a project by helping them to run a study or analyze some data. It could be in my lab, we have people who just want to work on infrastructure stuff. They want to write code that makes robots work. They don't want to work on research questions, but they want to build cool tools that let our robots do interesting things in our studies and help support the research that we're doing. And then we actually do have undergrads who will take on their own research problem and define it from start to finish. I actually was just meeting with a student earlier today, even though it's a Sunday. He's been working on a conference deadline day in and day out, and he put together this whole project self-led, basically on his own. I've been happy to advise him, but that's definitely not common. It takes a huge amount of persistence to do that. All that to say, there's many different ways to get involved in research, whether it's leading a project on your own versus being an assistant versus working on, technical skills that you can contribute to a project. All of those things are welcome. It's just going to depend on the lab and specifically what openings they have at a particular time.
Wonderful. And I think sometimes, I know that when I was in high school, I thought about research as just like, oh, you're published in Nature. And like, that is certainly a type of research. But I think the functioning of any lab involves the contributions to so many different kinds of people. And you'd be hard pressed, I think, to find undergrads on campus that aren't assisting in research in one way or another. So I kind of appreciate the definition of research from the start. The next question, I think, is actually a really great one. As a broad university, Yale is home to just wonderful infrastructure, whether that be our libraries, the medical campus, the different museums, right? So Donnie, hi Donnie, who's tuning in from Springfield, Massachusetts, asks, how are undergraduates able to engage spaces like the medical campus or the Peabody Museum? And Corinne, I'm going to put you on the spot there because I know that you've done work at the Peabody before.
Yes, oh, that's an amazing question. All of the spaces are open to undergraduates, which is amazing. So the brand new Peabody Museum of Natural History was recently renovated in the spring. I highly encourage everyone to check it out if you're in New Haven. It's absolutely beautiful. And I started working in the collections my freshman year. And so I work in the ornithology collections because I'm super interested in birds. And so I help prep the bird specimens that unfortunately hit windows around campus. So excuse me one second. There we go. Hopefully everyone can hear me all right. And so I started working in the Peabody there, but actually a lot of my classes are in the Peabody as well. But I also spent a lot of time in the Yale School of the Environment. So all of our graduate school buildings are incorporated into the undergraduate campus, and students have access to those during the week, and you can go hear talks or just study amongst the master's students. So that's been a really amazing opportunity. And I actually conduct research in a lab in the Yale School of the Environment.
And Lauren, are there any kind of like physical spaces on campus that you can speak to about like places that you're doing exciting work in?
Yeah, I think all of our spaces on campus really are like well-resourced to do work in. I spend a lot of time myself, even though I'm an electrical engineering major, in our computer science building, in a lab that we have upstairs that we affectionately call the zoo, because it has a bunch of really nice computers in there. And they're all named after animals, hence the name. And that space is, you see a lot of just people working on classes, but also the whiteboards I think are always just full of like interesting questions. Another space I really like is downstairs in the building right next door. We have our teaching lab concourse, which is a beautiful set of labs with really nice equipment that's available for undergrads to do their own research on, and then you also use it for classes. But one of my favorite things about those labs isn't the physical infrastructure, but the human infrastructure we have down there, because there are 3 lab directors whose full-time jobs is overseeing the mechanical, electrical, and chemical engineering lab students, advising on projects. I've been in places where I'm missing components for a project that's due, and the electrical engineering guy in particular is just the best resource of old stories, new parts that you might need, and advice in whatever you're doing in the major.
That's great. I feel like even though I've been on campus for 16 years and counting, I'm just discovering new physical and metaphorical spaces as related to STEM. So it's a wonderful time to be here. A few other questions that were pre-submitted that I think are great to touch on before we transition. Basia is tuning in from the Big Apple, New York, New York. Hi, Basia. And she asks, Yale is known for combining different fields of research. How does Yale support collaboration across departments? And can you share an example of research or some kind of work that has come from this approach? So I'm happy to kind of hand that over to everyone. I know that Professor Demers talked a little bit about physics and dance too.
I can dive in with that. For faculty, we actually have a fund for interdisciplinary classes. So if you want to develop a new interdisciplinary class, you can get seed money and have even a semester off to prepare. So that's just a really concrete example. And when my colleague and I were making the physics and dance class, we did take advantage of that together. So I'll stop there and let other people share examples. I have more, but hand it over.
Yeah, one of my favorite is actually the class I mentioned as my most formative engineering experience here. It was a class, like I said, that was co-taught between a professor in the computer science department and a professor in the law department. And they actually ended up creating a lab together that focused on like the ethical implications of a lot of like AI systems. And it was really interesting. I got to work with both professors in separate research, but also their combined research. And one of the coolest things that I got to do as an undergrad coming out of that was actually this law professor was writing a book on like it was kind of a different approach to thinking about hackers. It was very much from a philosophical point of view, but he needed technical editors. So he came to the class and he asked, hey, does anyone have a lot of technical hands-on experience with writing this type of code? And I volunteered as a freshman, and he decided that he would let me edit his book. So I think that's like one of the coolest interdisciplinary experiences I've had here.
Anyone else want to add in, or we have a lot of other questions too?
It wasn't a project I was involved in directly, but I work in Professor Richard Prum's lab, who's our prominent ornithologist on campus. And one of the highlights while I was there was that he had worked on a project with an undergraduate in the past on songbird learning. And that was a collaboration between the College and Evolutionary Biology Department and the Yale School of Music. So that was a really interesting collaboration, and it was definitely possible on campus.
Yeah, I think just interdisciplinary education, cross collaboration across academic, personal, or extracurricular interests, just what it means to be a Yalie, from the faculty side or the undergraduate side, which I think is what draws students to this community. I think maybe let's transition to some live questions, if that sounds good. People have been very eager. I love that. Very motivated. So I've already bubbled up a good number of live questions that have been asked. And I know that we will have nowhere near enough time to address all these questions. What I will say is a lot of the questions being asked are kind of department specific, right? And one thing I want you to encourage, or one thing I want to encourage you to do, is do your own research, right? The internet is a wonderful place. And I love that our faculty members are really excited to share about their research in their labs, right? One resource I will direct you to, and I'll drop the link in the chat, are these STEM faculty features, which are kind of video overviews filmed by some of our faculty members that give you a taste of the work that they're doing. Professor Demers has one on this website as well. So if you want to learn more about her research in particular, you can check that out. But for some live questions, let's see. All right. This is an interesting one, and I think it's a good question to posit. And I'll actually take this one. And if anyone has any thoughts, they can add. And the question is, what kind of STEM student would not be successful or happy at Yale, right? And I think that's a good question because at the end of the day, the college search process should hopefully be one about reflection and discovery and realizing that you can be a successful student in so many different environments and contexts, right? Well, I would posit that being a serious scientist or engineer at Yale is just a great choice in general. And this is asked by a young man named Matthew. I will say that Yale, regardless of what you major in, whether it be ABET accredited mechanical engineering, EEB, humanities, history, whatever it is, all students have to complete what are called distributional requirements, which are general areas of academic inquiry that we feel you need some experience in. And these are natural sciences, social sciences, humanities, quantitative reasoning, writing, foreign language. So if you are the kind of scientist or engineer that has truly zero interest in studying a foreign language, would find it like actively painful to take a history class, you know, I just don't know if you're going to be as happy as you could be here on our campus because you actually have to take those classes, right? But I think what's cool about our community is that most of our scientists, engineers find that pushing themselves outside of their academic comfort zone and taking classes in these distributional requirements actually makes them better researchers and better scientists and better engineers, right? So that's the one answer I would kind of provide to that. You know, this is a good opportunity. Corinne or Lauren, are there like classes outside of your STEM majors that you were like, wow, that was incredible?
Yeah, I spend all of my time in the English department. I'll say as a scientist, I'm all about increasing public communication. I think that the best asset of a good scientist is being a good communicator and learning how to write with clarity and precision. So when I'm not taking ecology classes, I'm in an English class. I'm in a wonderful English class called The Genre of the Sentence by Verlyn Klinkenborg, which is all about clarity and precision. But I also loved my Spanish class. So I spent this past summer in Panama doing research in the heart of the Panama Canal on Barro Colorado Island in conjunction with the Smithsonian. And I was working with a field tech purely in Spanish. So being able to have that language credit and use my 14 years of Spanish through Yale research was amazing. And I thought that was a really enriching part of my Yale experience and research.
Yeah, I can say the same for many of the classes I've taken. I grew up in the like Virginia, Washington, D.C. area, so was always really interested in politics. But I knew that my heart was in engineering, so I always figured when I went to college I would have to kind of give up any chance to like study politics, to engage with that at all. But both in a lot of the classes I've taken through the Jackson School, which is a graduate school on campus. And to me, it's crazy that it's not even a global affairs major undergrad. I'm still allowed to take classes in the global affairs graduate school, which is something super cool about being here. And I've also been able to engage in a lot of extracurriculars that really have nothing to do with engineering. And I found that it's fun to be like the engineer in the room and bring a different perspective to those spaces.
Absolutely. And I will say as a non-STEM major, having scientists and engineers in my economics classes, in my music classes, in my women's gender and sexuality classes, their perspectives were crucial to why I think our academic work was so kind of provocative and interesting and engaging. So it's the opportunity to study concepts and ideas with so many different kinds of students that I think is really exciting. There's some funny questions here, actually. Someone asks, are there any cons about research at Yale, or is it just perfect? I think it's pretty awesome, to be honest. Another question that I think is helpful to posit this is from Ryan. Ryan, thank you so much for tuning in. And Ryan asks, does every undergraduate student have the opportunity to connect with professors in research?
Yeah, so I'm definitely noticing a trend in a lot of these questions about who's allowed to do what research and how competitive is it. And I'll say that typically research is done like on an ad hoc basis where you email a professor, and if that professor wants you in their lab and it works out well with your interests, then you can just go. There are some more formalized processes for like your senior thesis, for example. There might be some requirements about like, oh, you need to do your thesis with a student in or with a faculty in your degree program. But even then, I've seen where you can get a co-advisor who is in a different department or in your department, whatever. So in a lot of ways, it's really not about there being some formalized process for matching people with research, but more about like, is the fit there for you and a specific professor who you want to work with? And so I'll say, at least like from my perspective, what I'm looking for when students email me about wanting to get involved in research is I want to know that they are self-directed and can take an idea and run with it. Because again, the difference between research and what else you'll be doing as a student is that in your classes, you're handed assignments and you can figure out how to solve the assignments with the reading in the book, and the answer is there. In research, it's not like that. And so I'm always looking for students who can take an idea and are not waiting for me to tell them how to do it or what to do next, because I don't always know, but that they'll show up and they'll put in the time and they'll try to solve the problem themselves. And so however you can make that kind of impression with your professors, whether it's through their classes, or sometimes they might invite you to come to a reading group with their students. So showing up and doing your readings and showing that you are inquisitive, those are all good things that will help get you involved in research.
And to jump on what Professor Fitzgerald said, in addition, because senior projects were mentioned, in addition to the research that you might do over the summer, or maybe some informal research projects that could happen anywhere, many of our majors in STEM actually bake in research experiences to the senior project. So for example, in physics, if you want to get a major in physics, you have to do at least one semester of research in someone's lab on campus. And it doesn't have to be a physicist, because physics happens in lots of different places on campus. It does have to be physics. So we even require research experiences from our students.
And for those of you that are tuning into this webinar, chances are you're likely going to major in a STEM field here in college or wherever you end up, right? But one of the interesting things about Yale is that students are very much able to engage with academic work and potentially even research in fields that they aren't majoring in, right? And that's one of those kind of distinguishing factors I think about science and engineering at Yale, and that when you apply to Yale, you don't apply into a major. You simply let us know what you're interested in studying. And then just like any other student, you have until the end of your second year, your sophomore year to declare a major, right? And even after you declare a major, you may find that you formed connections with faculty members in departments that you're not majoring in. And you can still continue those relationships, whether they be formalized into research or just a mentorship opportunity, right? So these kind of ideas of like siloing academic communities apart from one another is very not what Yale is about, which is great. This is more of a lighthearted question, but I do think it's an important one because I know that everyone on this webinar works very, very hard. And the question is, what's life like as a STEM student outside of taking classes? Like, how do you have fun? How do you balance your social life? Lauren, Corinne, do you want to speak to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think life outside of being a STEM student is fairly similar to life outside of being any sort of student here at Yale. There are a lot of really rigorous programs of study here besides engineering, and I find that I think that there's the stereotype of like, oh, the business majors are like over there, like doing whatever, and while the STEM majors are studying. And I really don't find that that's true among a lot of my friends. I personally am on the rugby team, so that consumes a lot of my time outside of classes. But I also really just enjoy hanging out in several of our like common spaces and meeting with friends. I always have a side project going on, just little things here and there that I find really enjoyable.
Yeah, the days are busy, both in the classroom and out of the classroom. I am a member of the Yale Ballroom dance team, so I compete in competitions and I'm at practice almost 6 days a week. We have coaches that come in, and it's a really fun way to hang out and just sort of let loose. I'm also on the club jump rope team, so I also do that, which is really fun. And this year, so I've been playing intramural pickleball, which is our lowest level of competitive sports on campus, and this semester I joined the New Haven Pickleball League. So I've been going out to the city courts, which has been really, really fun. So I'm out and about, I'm dancing. I like to play guitar and clarinet and piano. So I performed at the open mic night on campus. And so I definitely stay busy when I'm not on a bird walk or out exploring East Rock Park. Get to relax and have some fun for sure.
Corinne, I feel like you need like to write a one-woman show where jump rope, ballroom dancing, pickleball, birds, the Peabody Museum. We'll stage it at the Peabody. It'll be great. It'll be awesome. Right. Um, I'm looking at the Q&A. We have over 100 different questions, so I just want to apologize to people tuning in. I love that people are so interested in STEM at Yale. Please continue to connect with our resources that we have available online. I'm going to ask maybe one or two more questions for the group, and then we'll have a kind of a little closing reflection. I think that will be helpful for everyone. Oh, so many good ones. I want to type answers to all of them. This is a good question. So I'll paraphrase it. Essentially, how important is it to come to Yale with like a clear idea of what you want to major in and what research you want to do? Or is it an environment where you can kind of fall into new departments and new fields?
I would say even if you're clear, even if you have that clear idea, try to keep curious and open because you never know. I don't think it's at all important to have it's not a bad idea to have a plan and to have a thought, but there are so many things you might find that are exciting for you. I would say keep your mind open if you can.
Yeah, and I think Yale provides a lot of opportunities for those that don't have it all immediately figured out the second they step on campus. There are first year seminars that help you, that are like dive really deep into the intersection of a couple topics with just a bunch of first years. And I think a lot of people discover a new interest out of those. The engineering department also has a class that goes through all 5 engineering disciplines over the course of 10 weeks. And at the end, you do a hands-on project that actually goes out into the real world, asks the community what problems they need engineered and brings it back into the class. So a lot of people have come in knowing they generally like to do engineering but aren't quite sure what kind, and have found their direction from that class.
Yeah, I'll speak from personal experience. I came from a birding background in high school, but when I landed freshman year, I did this huge project on fish and fossilized fish teeth and didn't know anything about paleontology. And I spent the next summer up at the Yale Myers Forest in northeastern Connecticut working on frogs and ranavirus and aquatic ecology, which is how I ended up in the world of forestry and working with master students at the School of the Environment. And now here I am a year later working in tropical forestry and the intersection of tropical bird communities. So if you keep an open mind when you come to campus, the possibilities are definitely endless.
All right. Well, we are just about hit 8 o'clock, and I want to be respectful of everyone's time, especially panelists, but also you viewers at home. I feel like, to be honest, if you're a STEM nerd like all of us, we could sit here for 4 hours talking about STEM. But I want to conclude by asking each of our panelists to maybe reflect on what their favorite thing is about being part of the STEM community at Yale. And I'll start kind of just as an observer, as someone that did not major in STEM here, but really thinks a lot about this community as an admissions professional. I think the thing that I've loved about this community is that everyone takes their work very seriously. They take their research seriously, but they don't take themselves seriously. There is a sense of celebration and joy around science and engineering here on campus that I can't sit here and say is decidedly unique or singular at Yale. But every time I engage with a student, a faculty member, no matter how important they are to the university or how high up they are in their department, they stop and engage, they share, they show up for each other's talks. And I think that sometimes the world of science and engineering can feel competitive. It can feel cutthroat. And it's not that our students aren't very ambitious. I think they are, but they know how to balance that ambition with the sense of just being present and being like engaged with others around them. And I think it's because they become like the professors that they're taking classes with. And the professors here really set that tone from the top down, right? So I think students will have a lot of different choices with regards to where to take their science and engineering talents and passions. But coming to Yale and being a scientist engineer to me feels like a very joyful choice. So that's my answer. Anyone want to jump in?
I'm happy to.
Yeah.
What attracted me to come here to Yale as faculty was this idea that engineering was going to grow. And actually the School of Engineering is very new. It started the year that I got here, 2022, as its own like separate school from the rest of Yale. And I was hired as part of a group of like 14 new computer science faculty, which is absurd. Like nobody else is doing that. And that same amount of growth won't happen year over year, but this idea of like having all these new people come in, having this whole new school, having lots more enrollment and all in one place is really an exciting place to be. I couldn't really see that being, that same opportunity being anywhere else, being able to be someplace where computer science and engineering was growing so quickly. And so I think there's just a lot of excitement with that. So many new faculty, so many new students, and the interest that the students have here is really broad too. I went to an engineering school for my PhD where everybody there did engineering. And coming here and seeing that, one of the largest majors on campus is computer science and economics. Like that's super cool. Like that's a dual major that we have, and it's extremely popular because the students here have more than just siloed interests. They really want to get a little bit of everything. And I think that's super cool.
For me, I think it has to be interdisciplinarity. So I've, undergraduate, graduate school, postdoc, different kinds of institutions. The thing that attracted me to Yale, actually, first of all, was the emphasis on teaching, which is not something that you find at every research university. That's something that I'm really passionate about. And so I wanted to be in a community that took teaching really seriously. But then also the fact that there's so many opportunities in the collaborating with people in not only scientific disciplines, but also, as I've said, the humanities and the arts. It's easy in an environment like a university to have a silo and to only be like when I was in graduate school, you know the path between your department and the cafeteria, and that's about it. But at Yale, they actually give faculty the ability to have lunch at the cafeterias. And so we're in the cafeterias every day, running into each other, running into our students. So not only are there opportunities, but there are also a lot of pieces put in place to make sure that we're bouncing into each other. So yeah, that's the key for me.
Yeah, I think it's hard. I'm torn between two. But one of the things about the interdisciplinary nature is just the purpose that it brings to how I think about engineering. I think a good example is like if you want to build a bridge, that is a civil engineer's job, right? But I feel like an education here prepares you not only to be able to design the bridge and do the technical aspects in great detail, but then also to be able to justify to the town council why you need the bridge and talk to all of the other people on the project and lead the project and really be able to do more than just sit in your one role. And as I've gone out into the world, into industry over my summers, I've found that that's what's really valued, is not someone, I mean, of course, someone that can do the work deeply and technically, but I mean, that's why we major in what we do. But really, they value the people that can understand and lead and work outside of their narrow focus. And I think that's something that Yale has given me that I never expected to need.
Yeah, I think Lauren makes an excellent point. I was super drawn to Yale because I wanted to be able to be a multifaceted scientist. And I thought, I'm more than just STEM. I want to be a dancer. I want to be a musician. I want to play sports. But I also want to have fun in the science world. And even as an ecologist, knowing that I wanted to pursue that when I came in, being able to explore the world of herpetology and ichthyology and forestry has been really amazing. And even as Lauren was saying, for example, I'm working on the Yale Bird Friendly Building Initiative, which is seeking to reduce bird collisions with buildings on campus. That's based out of the Yale Peabody Museum and the ornithology collections, but that's a project that is in direct collaboration with architecture and the Yale Law School, as it's an ethics panel, and talking to Yale facilities about how we can put up stripes on the windows to help reduce those collisions, and talking to city planning in the city of New Haven. So those are interdisciplinary discussions that you need to be able to solve real world problems. And I think the liberal arts curriculum that goes hand in hand with STEM at Yale is what you need to be a leader of tomorrow.
Exactly. And I think I'll just wrap things up by saying my favorite TV show growing up was a show called Reading Rainbow. And the host, LeVar Burton, would always say, but you don't have to take my word for it. And I hate to leave you on a cliffhanger, but I'm going to ask you to kind of believe in that. I'm going to drop a link to this website called Yale News. And in the bottom half of the landing page, you can sort by topic. And there's a filter called Science and Technology about all of the cool things going on campus for science and technology, right? I just looked real quick, and some of the headlines that immediately pop up: building houses with 3D printers, 3-2-1 liftoff, rocket science for everyone soars at Yale, reshaping Yale for a new wave of quantum mechanics, how an ancient shipwreck may help explain the universe, right? And so, you kind of don't have to take our word for it. If you just kind of take a look at what's going on campus, right, you'll see that Yale is a wonderfully exciting place to be a scientist or engineer, not only because of the way in which we're able to support your work, but I also think because of the context and the community in which you're doing that work, right? So with that, I'll start to wind things down. I just want to, again, provide a huge thank you to Professor Demers, Professor Fitzgerald, Lauren, Corinne. A Sunday night at Yale is a very busy time for everyone, right? And I'm so grateful to these amazing students and my colleagues on the faculty to make time for this. We encourage you all to do your research, get online, learn more about our community here. And if any one of you applies to Yale and is admitted, we'll be so excited to welcome you to our community. So thank you so much for your time. Have a wonderful rest of your day. And we'll hopefully get to know you through the application process. Thank you.